Narcissists are masters at creating a perception of perfection to the outside world so no one believes the victims. Dana S. Diaz was one of those victims. She often felt hopeless during her childhood and also as an adult. This made Dana feel stuck, and she felt dead inside. When she became physically ill as a result of the chronic stress of abuse, she felt a responsibility to create awareness about the effects of abuse on the mind and body that a narcissist puts you on. You do not want to miss Dana's story today.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Educated in journalism and psychology from DePaul University, Dana Diaz's lifelong experience with abuse makes her an expert in the mental and physical struggles of victims and survivors alike. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start with your story. Share as much of your story as you would like.
Well, thank you. My story, unfortunately, sort of started before I was even born. My mother became pregnant with me as a teenager, and, back then it was not appropriate for a teenage girl to be pregnant, and especially be an unwed pregnant mother. So she was ridiculed, she was shamed, she endured a lot, and I don't dismiss that in any way. However, after she had me, she still didn't want me. She didn't even try to connect with me. And the ramifications just sort of set me up for, a lifetime of this, the mental and physical repercussions of it. So she was kind of emotionally neglectful. She kept physical distance from me. And looking back, I didn't understand this as a child. And, I heard the references to me being an accident and a mistake. I was called a bastard child at school. Teachers would refer to me as illegitimate. It's such a disparaging thing to feel this resistance from people, and to feel deficient so young, because you don't understand it. You're just a kid, and you're just, trying to go to school and have a snack and watch cartoons. And, I feel that I wasn't able to really enjoy my childhood much because I was trying to negotiate all of these, this narrative basically that was created about me, because I didn't know what it meant. But over the years, I internalized it. I made it about me, because it was very clear that no matter where I turned, at home, at school, there was something wrong with me. And it did not help that, like I said, my mother still, she never, I'm 48 years old, we have no contact, but she married a man, not my biological father, but she married a man who wanted me even less. And you want to talk about a narcissist, I didn't know what one was back then, but there was definitely an arrogance about him that I wasn't sure where it came from, because there was no outward evidence that he had any entitlement to be that arrogant. Not that anybody should, but He was also physically and verbally abusive to me. So I have my mother making me feel a certain way, basically burdening me with her shame, of what she had done because she didn't want to face it, and scapegoating me for that. And then he is telling me every day, and I always tell people, like, when you're hearing this, I want you to imagine any child that you know that's maybe 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old. Imagine these words being spoken to them. Nobody wanted you. You shouldn't even be alive. I shouldn't have to pay for another man's child. You're not good enough. You're going to get fat if you eat that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Your hips are spreading like a middle-aged woman. Like all these, I mean, I could go on and on with this tape that played in my head for years and years because this was every day. And then you follow that with the physical abuse because as much as our society back then, I mean, people have to remember, even in the 1970s, a woman couldn't file charges against a husband for domestic violence or abuse. So everything was very hush hush. We don't talk about that. We don't bring that up. You know, if I tried to go to grandma and say he's mean to me or mom doesn't like me, shh, don't talk about that. We don't talk about those things. You know, that's just how life was and how society was. But I was a kid and I didn't understand this. So I would stand up for myself. I would speak up. But if I spoke up, my mother would tell me that I was lying to make things up. I was lying to get attention. She didn't believe me. And then she'd try to hush me up so she didn't get in trouble for being participant in the conversation because I could see her fear that if we were caught by him having these conversations, if he heard what I was saying about him, there would be repercussions. So there was a fear then that I even took on myself. And then, all of this physical abuse that he was putting me through. I have been strangled and thrown downstairs and my head's been beaten against the wall. I picked up the phone once to call for help and was beaten with the phone. And so it was just such a terrible thing that I couldn't open my mouth, but I had to open my mouth because I felt very strongly I should stand up for myself. But if I opened my mouth, I still was, abused for it. So by the time I was a teenager and I was bigger and I was stronger, I started fighting back and I was very angry. And it didn't help ease the anxiety and the depression and all this other stuff that comes with that. And by then I had developed triggers. I knew what the sound of his footsteps on the stairs, pounding on every stair, like impending doom. I felt that. I knew what that meant, so then I carried these things in my life, my whole life, even after I left that home. But what was worse was what I carried into my life after I left that home in terms of relationships, because as much as I knew it was wrong and as much as I even looked at my mother thinking, how could she be with a man who treats us this way or treats me this way? I wasn't even sure the extent of their relationship, whether it had ever been. I'd never seen any physical abuse, but I couldn't imagine it was just for me. But I left that house thinking nobody's ever going to mistreat me. I'm never going to let a man treat me like that. I don't want to be anything like my mother. And the first thing I did, the first young man that entered my life, and ironically, I will never forget the second I met him. Instinctively, I thought, oh my gosh, he reminds me of my stepfather, my abusive stepfather. He's aloof, he's arrogant, he wants servitude. But what did I do? I went back into, I didn't know what a people pleaser was back then. I didn't understand all the psychology. But looking back, I could honestly say it's like my mind went into auto mode, survival mode. He doesn't like me. He likes service. Well, I better make him happy. It's up to me. I don't like his reaction to me. I better please him. I better jump through all these hoops and make everything right and make sure he's pleased with me. I need his approval. And where did that end me up? It ended me up in a 25-year relationship in which, 3 weeks after I met him, he threw something across the room at me and had a violent outburst. And it wasn't even over anything big. It was over a music CD that I had bought. Wasn't a big deal. But by the end, we're talking guns and knives, and he planned to kill me. So it's very hard when I look back and think, it all started when I was born. It all started in my childhood. It started with how I was treated at home and how I perceived roles and how I perceived my role in relationships and how I saw my mother and my stepfather interact and what that meant in my mind of a romantic relationship, of a husband and wife, a boyfriend and girlfriend. And no matter what I knew, my intellect told me one thing. I still fell into that same cycle. But the worst part of it, and the reason that I am so vocal and so open about it now, is that we've all heard this term, stress can kill you. But it wasn't until the end, well, it's essentially what made me end my first marriage, was when I became physically ill, because the severity of this, I did not become physically ill because of any physical abuse or physical threat. It was actually because I had been living with so much mental angst. I was suppressing emotions. I was in fight or flight mode. I was in panic more of the time than I wasn't. And all of this cortisol, which is a stress hormone, had been running through me at such astronomically high rates that my white blood cells thought it had to eradicate something. It ended up killing themselves off. So I was having all these autoimmune reactions that I didn't understand, and no doctor could relate them. They just wanted to throw a pill at every symptom. But it also gave me, when I finally got with the right doctor that got me with Mayo Clinic, they ended up realizing that I had a very rare lung disease. But the irony, it's only rare because it only shows up in victims of abuse.
Oh, you're
Victims of abuse. It's called upper airway resistance syndrome. And my neurologist said that it's interestingly like having COPD and fibromyalgia all at once. So if you take the symptoms of both of those and combine them and add in the autoimmune reactions, that's what I was physically enduring. And you feel like you're dying. And at one point, my doctor did say, your body is actually shutting down. I had dropped almost 20 pounds in only 2 weeks. 2 weeks. People were looking at me like I was walking death. I was 93 skeletal pounds. I had an oxygen machine in a backpack to keep my lungs going, to keep me breathing. My oxygen levels were falling below COVID rates. I had nothing was working. My digestive system wasn't working. My muscles were tensing. I couldn't sit for 10 minutes without taking about 10 minutes to stand back up, because it's like I would go into rigor mortis. It was such an awful feeling to be 45 years old. I had been a cross-country coach for 9 years. I ran 5 miles every day. I ate apples and hard-boiled eggs for lunch. So why was this happening to a person that should be so healthy? It was because of the toxicity of the relationship. So I want people to understand that you don't have to have black eyes. You don't have to have a husband that wants to kill you. But if you are experiencing anything that is causing you so much mental suffering that you even begin to have stomach aches and headaches, I beg of you, don't dismiss that, because it's sad to me that I realize now that I've written a book about my childhood, I started having stomach aches and headaches almost every day around when I was 6, 7 years old, which was just shortly after my mother moved us in with her new husband, my stepfather. So I don't think that's a coincidence. And I realize that there's so many people out there as well that are autoimmune, or fibromyalgia is a big one, MS, all of these different, diagnoses that we're getting. But the interesting thing is that doctors don't ask about your trauma. If you go to a doctor of physical medicine, they are focused on the physicality of it. They want to address your symptoms, make you better in that way, and that's it. But they don't sit down and ask you if you have had abuse or trauma because you have a headache or stomach ache, or because your hands go numb, or whatever it is. They are looking at it scientifically, but I would beg of anybody who does have roots of abuse in their childhood. There's a wonderful book by a man, Dr. Gabor Mate. It's called The Myth of Normal, and in it he says something very profound. If you take the word disease, it means dis-ease. And he says that's not an accident. When you are at dis-ease mentally, you will have disease in your body.
That's interesting that you said that, because that is a poster in my chiropractor's office. I thought this.
Well, I love that.
Yeah, I know. I was just there this morning. I couldn't believe when you said that. Wow.
Well, good. I'm glad that your chiropractor is aware.
Exactly. Well, you explained it incredibly well, because I did not understand that connection. I certainly understood, as I think most people do, especially today, how stress plays a factor in our health. But this is not today. This was back then. And it's still, you've been able to explain it to the point where it's easy for anyone to comprehend and to relate if they need to, and to seek help. So at what point did you realize that you needed help? What was the pivot point there?
That's interesting, because I was my eyes were wide open even as a little girl. And it's very hard when you are a child victim of abuse, because, again, the parents were saying, I'm a liar, I'm making it up to get attention. So I didn't have, you don't have resources available to you as a child that you do, unless you are exhibiting the physical aspects, then authorities step in. But I was very aware. Now, by the time I was a teenager, I think I was about 15 years old, when my mother just decided that, they didn't know what else to do with me except to take me to a therapist. And I thought that was interesting, because what they didn't know what to do with me was they didn't know how to control me and force me to conform, to play my role in the happy family facade. That's what the problem was. It wasn't that I was a problem, because I honestly, and perhaps I'm biased on myself, but I honestly was a straight arrow. I was honor roll, first chair in orchestra in my section, good grades, good girl, never smoked, never drank. I was a really, really good kid, in bed by 8 p.m., even as a teenager. So they didn't know what else to do with me. But going to these sessions with the therapist, I'm sitting there rolling my eyes, like, I'm not the one who needs to be sitting here. I'm not the one who needs the help. And just having these conversations, I had at that point at 15 been reading articles in Psychology Today. I would go to the library and read books about psychology, because I was trying to understand what I was going through. And so we would have, somewhat intelligent conversations during my therapy sessions, and that just continued. So, by the time I was in college and I was over 18, I was able to seek my own counsel. And I always knew that I just needed somebody that, even if I had to pay them to talk, it was helpful for me to have somebody that let me feel heard. And even if they didn't understand, I was able to speak freely. Whereas when I was a child, again, I was hushed. Even my great grandma, who I love very much, and in my heart, she's my mother, as far as I'm concerned, I went to her a few times in my life, and she would just put her finger up to her lips, because we're supposed to respect my mother's decision, and that's her husband, and that's what it is, and we don't talk about it. So, and I know she didn't mean that, and that's just how, those generations, dealt with that type of thing. So I was glad to have that self-awareness. And I think that's the first step for anybody, is to just be aware. I don't appreciate when people say you need help or you should get help. But the reality is that nobody, even now, I have written, 2 books, almost done with the 3rd one. I've been on how many podcasts, I've spoken in summits for healing. But even now, a couple months ago, I realized, you know what? There's some things I still haven't completely worked out. I need to find the right person to help me along the rest of the way, because that's what we all need. We can't do it on our own. And let's be real. What did I really want in my childhood? I was looking for where I fit in, where I belonged. And as humans, we crave connection. When people are lonely or say, I have no one, I'm all alone, it's not that they're alone. It's not that they're alone at all. It's that they don't have a connection. Their heart is broken and they need somebody to put those two pieces of their heart back together, or connect their heart and one half into the other. So it's, even if it's in therapy, it's just having that connection to somebody, knowing that you can freely speak and speak your truth without judgment or shame.
Now, you mentioned that even now there are things that come up, that might trigger old memories or whatever. How long did the process take from the time that you first sought help?
I don't think that there's a time, because I'm 48 and I went to the first therapist at 15. I think everybody deals with things in their own time. And unfortunately, I've met many people, and probably the most frustrating part for me in what I do now is when I meet people that say that, they're reaching out, begging for help and asking for resources. But when you offer them, that they're still in that mode of victimhood where they say, oh, well, that won't work for me, or I can't, or we all have choices. But it's very interesting, because I have learned that you can't really help somebody get there. They have to help themselves. And no matter whether you're in therapy for 2 days or 20 years, at the end of it, you can be given the tools, you can be given the advice, you can be given wisdom, but you still have to do the work. And I think that what people miss is that it's not about going to your 3 o'clock every Thursday appointment. Physical health, if you want to exercise and have a healthy body, what do? Like, for me, I walk an hour every day. I take an hour-long walk every day. I like the fresh air. I like to breathe. I like the exercise. Some people go to the gym and work out, every other day. Whatever it is, you are maintaining a consistent pattern of exercising your physical health. We are not doing that with mental health. For some people, for some reason, people think you wave a magic wand over somebody, that they go to therapy for some particular amount of time or a particular number of sessions, and that everything's just going to be okay. But it's not. It is just like physical health. You gotta lift the weights. You gotta lift that heaviness off of yourself. But it takes daily concerted effort to do so. That's something that therapy for one person could, they can feel good after a few years. Some people just need a few sessions because of a circumstantial, situation that they're in. But I think everybody comes to it on their own, and it'll endure for as long as they need it. And like, for me, I didn't have it for probably 20 years easily, but it came to a point where, okay, I've gotten along just fine, but now I realize there's this thing specifically that I just don't know how to get past on my own. And there is no book that I have read, or YouTube that I've watched, or a podcast that I have heard that has, flipped the switch in my head to make this thing, better for me. So now I need to reach out for help. So I think I've come to terms with, I think it's lifelong. Just like your physical health, if you want to be healthy, you got to eat healthy, you got to make healthy choices. Same for your mental health. You just have to continue the pattern and take it on your own. And I think the biggest part of healing is to give yourself grace. I think that we put pressure on ourselves, that we got to do something in a certain time, or we got to be it is what it is. And I'll tell you what, you can be doing really good and have a setback. You can not even need therapy and be at peace and everything's fine. And then, you have a dream and it brings up a suppressed memory, something you haven't thought of in 30 years, and it really upsets you and takes you back to dark places. It happens. But you just have to embrace that this is your journey and yours is unique, just like everybody else's, and everybody's having a human experience. And you just have to take it for what it is. But if you can be self aware, be aware of what's happening when it's happening, be aware of how you feel, embrace those emotions, sit in those emotions, feel the emotions. Don't just put them under the rug. Don't disappear or distract from them. Sit with them, feel them, process them. Then you're going to get somewhere.
One thing I appreciate about you as you're sharing your story is that there is no bitterness. And that is phenomenal. And my hat is off to you. And consequently, that's how you can help others, because people will see that passion in you, that because you have been there, you want to help them. And I appreciate you sharing as you did this morning.
Thank you.
The other thing that I wanted, you did say a couple things that I wrote down here that I appreciate before we go into the second half of this interview. And one was, kindness has a domino effect, even on yourself. Forgive yourself and know that it only can get better, because you probably had moments where you blamed yourself, I would assume.
Absolutely. And I think that's the most loving thing you can do. Forgiveness is a very personal thing. And, there's a lot of debate about what forgiveness is and whether forgiveness is required for healing. But I think the most important thing that we need to do is to forgive ourselves, because you can't heal if you're still blaming and feeling guilty and feeling shame and all these things. At the end of the day, everybody, every single person, everybody, even the people who seem to have the perfect life and have it all together, everybody has been through something, is going through something. So it's okay. It's okay to be human, and it's okay not to be perfect. And it's okay to have had things happen to you and have gone through experiences. And I think when you realize that and kind of separate the fact that it's not personal to you, it was not done to you specifically. Right. This is just something that affected you, but it's not who you are. Then I think you can make peace with it and be more open to feeling the joy and the love of other people, and feeling the blessings in the present and the possibility of the future. And then you're open to healing because you want to be at peace. Nobody wants to live that way in the past and upset about all the things that had happened to them and why it happened. We want to be happy, and everybody deserves to be happy.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. We're just going to take a quick 15-second break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the effect that your situation had on your son. Also, to help people, to give them tips on how they can get out of their situations that they may be enduring right now. And of course, we're going to talk about your book. So we'll be right back.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another: gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
We're going to continue listening to Dana's story of being a victim of a narcissistic husband, mother, and how it affected her entire life. And one of the reasons that I know she wants to share her story, probably the main reason, is that her story can help others. And as you listen to it, maybe you will relate, or you will know someone who can relate. I suggest strongly that you pass this story on to anyone that you know that could be helped. And this is where we're going to continue our conversation now, is what they can do to come out from under the impact, the pain of that abuse. So I thank you, Dana, for what you have shared already. And before we continue with talking about your book, etc., I'd like you to share, if you would, how this affected your son.
Well, obviously, it affected him in many ways. He does not, to this day, know even the half of what went on between me and his dad. Unfortunately, when you are with a narcissist, the narcissist, I mean, to say they have no boundaries, with regard to children, they often use the children as pawns. They pit the children against you. They lie to the children about you, hoping that the children will side with them against you because, especially with a woman, I mean, my weak spot is my son, as I'm sure for any mother, that would be the same, is that the children are your weak spot and they know where to get you. They know where to get you where it hurts. So my son, I am very happy to say, we've been out of this situation for 4 years. He's now 21 years old. Is he unscathed? Of course not. I think there's stuff there, but I am very proud and very happy that through all of that, trying to raise my son throughout physical abuse and mental abuse, and there was financial abuse and sexual abuse and legal, all the stuff going on behind the scenes. I always made sure to show up for him the best that I could. I always tried to give him the normalcy that we did not have, but I wanted him to think he had it. And I don't know if that was the right or wrong thing to do, but he has many, many friends. He graduated high school, went off to technical school, had multiple job offers, got the job he wanted. He is, I mean, success is a relative thing, but as far as being set for life, he bought his first house when he was 19, all on his own. He is successful and in his own right as far as everything, mentally, physically. So I'm glad for him that he doesn't seem to have the repercussions of the life that we had. And, there were times during our life, his life, I should say, that he did come to me and express, when he was 7, 8 years old. I remember him telling me he doesn't ever want to be like his father, and he's never going to drink alcohol because that just made things worse. And even when he was 14, I remember him telling me, just out of the blue, out of nowhere, he said, "I know you're going to divorce Dad someday. Just make sure I'm not around. If you could wait till I'm done with high school and, out of state off at my other school, because I don't want to be here. He's going to make life a living hell for us."
Oh my goodness.
He was very aware of who his father is. But that's still his father. So I was very careful to always and still be very diplomatic. I just avoid conversation about him at all now, about my ex-husband, because there's no point. I don't need to talk about him. But even back then, I would just keep things light because it's not my right to take my son's father away from him. He's old enough, I think, to make that choice for himself, for what he's willing to tolerate, but I also recognize that narcissists are very choosy about who they, abuse, so to speak. And I know that it was specific to me. And I hope that somewhere in his dark soul that he has some fondness for our son. But if not, that is my son's, not that I'm leaving him out there to fend for himself, but I think he does have to make that choice for himself, because it's just like when you do approach somebody that's in a situation, people often do ask, as you were leading to, what do you do if you know somebody in the situation? The problem is that it's kind of like when you're addicted to alcohol or to drugs, you can't go to somebody and say, well, beer's not good for you or cocaine's not good for you. Just stop. You know what? You think they don't know that? They're drowning themselves in that for some deeper reason. There's something deeper going on. They have to be the ones to decide that they have a problem and that they have to stop. And it's the same thing when you have a victim. I mean, for me specifically, I can speak to the fact that, I mean, I knew for 15 years before I left that I didn't want to be there. It's not that I didn't want to, it's not that I didn't see what was going on. You know, I think people just thought that I needed to be told to leave, and it wasn't even that. I was scared to leave. I was
Right.
terrified because another thing narcissists do, and they do it in so many ways that you don't even know they're doing it. Like you have a child and they say, oh, don't work anymore. Stay home and raise the baby. I'll take care of us. And it sounds like it's all wrapped up in a nice, pretty package. But what they're really doing is taking away your financial independence, your ability to leave them if you want to. So they go about things in a very sneaky way that you don't suspect when you're really in it. You don't start seeing things until
Mhm.
you're too far into it and looking back. But, you know, looking back, you always see things clearly. So it's very hard to really get through to somebody. I think somebody just needs to come to the terms on their own, just like with any other addiction, and then decide what's best for them. Because unfortunately, it's not what people want to hear, but sometimes there have been a couple times, even when people have come to me, reached out to me, where based on what they tell me, I think it is better for them to stay. I think it is safer for them to stay, safer for their children. Um, and it's so sad that it comes to that, but I do prepare them, you know, for if they have that little bit of an opportunity, that little loophole to escape, you know, that they need to be ready. And there's certain tips I can give for that. But it's a very hard thing to just expect somebody to up and leave, because even in a normal situation where there isn't abuse, it's not realistic. I mean, somebody can want to end their marriage, but you have family ties, you have children, you have a mortgage together. Maybe you can't afford a whole other household, so the house has to be sold, or, you know, who's going to take the dog? And in our case, we had a farm, we had cows, we had pigs, we had chickens, we had, you know, it wasn't just as easy as just like, oh, I'm out of here. I'm not happy, so I'm leaving. So, you know, life is a little more complicated than we sometimes feel it is. And
Right.
we just have to decide for ourselves what the best way is out of that situation. And like I said, safety, when you're dealing with, you know, a physical threat or physical violence, that's the most important thing.
You have answered a lot of questions that I think my audience has, or had rather, and I appreciate that. You laid it out perfectly, and I thank you for that. Now, tell us what you haven't yet told us about your book, which is entitled Gasping for Air: The Strange Hold of Narcissistic Abuse.
Yes, that book comprises the entire 25-year relationship with my ex-husband. It actually was developed from the journal that I kept hidden under the couch cushion in
Hmm.
the basement during COVID. When we were coming out of that, it just struck me that I felt like I had a responsibility to really let people know what, you know, this isn't just, oh, I'm depressed and anxious because I had a bad
Hmm.
marriage or I was abused, you know, to inflict this, you know, lung disease on me that I would have never guessed when they say stress can kill you, that it could actually kill you. But it's also something that's alarming to me that so many people don't really understand what abuse looks like from the inside versus the outside. So, what's different about my book is I did not, you know, when I first met with my publisher, she said, "Oh, well, you know, the poor woman and the husband's a big bully. That's been done and over, and boo-hoo, poor you." And she didn't mean that insensitively, but she said, if you want this to be different, you have to be completely raw and open and honest. And you weren't always an angel either. And I'm like, well, I could straighten my halo out right now. But, you know, the reality is she
Hmm.
was right. And I
Hmm.
think what's different about my book is that there are things that I'm very ashamed of, that I, whether they were thoughts or actions, things that happened in that relationship, that um, I feel like I was pushed to do those things, but at the end of the day, I take accountability that they weren't right. It wasn't the right way to go about it, but it's what was. And so, I mean, between, his narcissism and my reactions, we failed each other. We failed ourselves. We failed our son in so many ways. But at the end of the day, I think that's part of the human experience. And what I have, through a lot of therapy, come to realize is that, none of us are superhuman. We're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. You have to fail to succeed, and you have to fail to understand what bravery is, and to become resilient, and to overcome the challenges that'll come in the future, because nobody has that perfect life. We are all facing challenges differently every day. And I think we have to just take what has happened in our past, take that muck, and learn from it and grow from it. Kind of like I always use the garden analogy. We're all like flowers in the dirt, and sometimes there's weeds and we can't see the sun, we can't get the rain, and people take away our nourishment, but we can't grow without that dirt. No flower just comes out of nowhere in perfection. We all need some of that rain and the sunshine. We need the dirt. We need the nutrients from the soil. And that's what these negative experiences are. We just have to use them for that growth instead of using them to wallow in misery, even though it would be justifiably fine to do so, and nobody would argue with it. Nobody wants to live a lonely and dejected sort of life. We want to rise from that stuff.
It's funny, as you're talking, I'm thinking of what probably was a quote someplace. I don't know where, but essentially what it says is you can't change the past, but it can have a strong effect on your future. I mean, that's basically what you are
Yeah.
saying. And like, I'm sure there is a quote out there like that, but that's the encouraging part. This is the part that you are talking about in a very positive, coming from a very negative place. And so I applaud you for that and I thank you for that.
Thank you very much. It's a hard thing to get to, but that's what I've served to do. I want people to know that there's more after that life. I was
Mhm.
terrified too. I was terrified, but I am now remarried to somebody I've known a very long time, ironically, but we have such an easy relationship, and it's a loving and healthy. I didn't think I was capable of a healthy
Aw.
marriage relationship. But even, so I don't want people to think they're broken or
Right,
damaged.
right.
You're just affected, but you can go on. It's okay.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that because I wasn't aware that you were married now and there is light, right? There is
Yeah.
definitely light. That's good. So, in summary, what would you like to say to the audience or any tidbits or encouragement that you would like to share?
Well, this is what I always like to tell people, and it's something we see all the time, but we take for granted, is just be kind. And it's not just being kind to others, even though to me that's a very important thing, how you speak to your children, how you speak to your partner, your spouse, your coworkers, people in your community, because kindness is, like I said, has that domino effect, but it's also being kind to yourself. Forgive yourself. We all sometimes stumble. We all make decisions that maybe weren't the best ones. We all make mistakes. But again, just take that as part of your life experience. Nobody is perfect, no matter what they say or what they try to tell you. We're all just trying to do the best with what we've been given.
Hmm.
And I think that it's just take from your life what's good and positive and go with it. And the rest of it, take a lesson from it and grow, be better, do better. But kindness, be kind to yourself, how you talk to yourself, how you treat yourself, all that self-care, and forgiving yourself. So that's what I'd like to leave everybody with. Just stop being hard on yourself and know that it gets better. The worst has, you have seen the worst if you've been in a really bad situation and you overcame that. You got through those bad days. So you'll get through the rest of them with a little more ease. I promise you.
Very strong and powerful words. Thank you. Perfect, perfect summary. Thank you again, Dana, for being on Never Ever Give Up Hope. and we look forward to checking out both of your books. New one is coming out in October when this will be airing, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Never Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.